Hit subscribe to the DIY Writer to support your hardworking authors and also lessen your chances of ending up as a victim in their next book. The world's largest UFO conference, Contact in the Desert, announces the launch of their 8th annual and very first virtual event. This event is focusing on UFOs and the year of science, also consciousness and the future. This will be held June 24th to 28th, 2021. Contact in the Desert is renowned for its top lineup of experts in the fields of ufology, forbidden archaeology, government disclosure, alien phenomenon, crop circles, and much more. Contact in the Desert already is the largest UFO conference in history and will now be the largest UFO conference in the virtual world, with over 60 lectures, 40 workshops, 11 panels, featured speakers presentations, virtual tours to Giant Rock, and other interactive events. Go to contactinthedesert.com for more information and get your tickets now. This is Jeff Bacon of the DIY Writer Podcast. Today we have Lou Rera with us. He's the author of Awake, Sign, and also there's no doors in a cocoon. That's kind of interesting. Anyway, how you doing today, Lou?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Cool. Just before this, we were looking at some videos that he had made for some book trailers, which I'm going to add to the probably one at the beginning and one at the end of the podcast for the YouTube viewers. Otherwise, the audio, you'll just have to go to my YouTube channel. So I'm sorry about that. Not really. Anyway, subscribe when you get there. Ha ha ha. Anyway, so Lou, what's going on?
Not too much. I'm helping prepare for some presentation materials for the Horror Writers Association's StokerCon award ceremony at the end of May.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so some friends of mine who are involved with the preparations and stuff asked me to do some work for it. So I'm going to be doing that over the next couple of weeks and laying back on the writing a bit for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have this book that you released last year, Awake. What can you tell us about that?
Awake is a collection of short stories that I've written over a few years, some very new, and then some that have been around a while, a couple that were published in some anthologies. But I felt that, you know, I'm working on another novel and I didn't want to wait another couple of years before I put out another novel, because Sign came out in 2014. And, you know, that old adage, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. Right. Yeah. And you're always in the idea, especially small indie writers like myself, where you're in the mode of promote the best way you can. And when COVID hit, I mean, not just this business, but every business got hobbled to some degree. And I felt, you know, it's a good time for people maybe to kick back and look into something new to read. So I was trying to, you know, hit an audience that was homebound, not by choice, but by force. So that's really how that came about. Even though I had been working on it for months before then, the timing, at least in terms of COVID and COVID marketing, hit just about the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any viral instigators in your short stories?
In what sense?
I'm just kind of curious. You released it in May, I think, is what I read.
Yeah, it was May.
There's a lot of authors that delayed, including myself, anything that had to do with vaccines or viruses, you know, that are attacking or anything like that. I was just curious if you had anything like that in the book.
No, but all my stories have a dark edge to them in some way or another, and many of them are about someone, a person going off the rails. So it's not about groups of people so much, but it's about it, you know, what happens to an individual when things start to stack against them. Sure. So I had no hesitation at all about releasing the material in that regard. Although you bring up an interesting point, like I was reading a quote by Bill Maher when he was referring to the Oscars and how boring the presentations have become. And he says, I need something that is entertaining, not to the point where I want to get in a bathtub and throw a toaster in there. So, yeah, I thought, yeah. And so on that level, you know, like, do you want to send out dark material during a dark time? And I thought, sure, why not? You know, because that's the nature of my work anyway. And anyone who follows the horror genre usually don't find too many uplifting stories in there. They might root for an antagonist that has become, you know, the hero and the villain at the same time, you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
But no, I didn't have any qualms about putting the material out because of COVID.
Well, I think it's interesting when you say some, you know, somebody's a hero and a villain at the same time, and you also brought up Bill Maher. He's kind of that.
Yes, he is, and he does it rather well. You know? So yeah, yeah, and you know, it's that whole idea where, you know, you can be controversial, but the way they used to say that is just however you do it, just spell my name right, remember who I am, whatever I'm associated with, you know.
The only, you know, there's some things he says I agree with, and there's some things he says I don't.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that's fine. But the thing that I like about him is he's willing to get up there and debate with you, not fight, but he's willing to have a conversation about it with anybody that wants to come on. And I respect the hell out of that.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
It's few and far between where, you know, I mean, we all see it on, you know, CNN and Fox and everything else, where somebody's just going, you know, ape shit, or, you know, just going, you know, back crazy on there. Oh my God, I'm gonna, you know, whatever. Where his stuff is, you know, he's got, you know, a few people there, and it seems to me that, you know, it's a pretty level-headed conversation where everybody's trying to bring up points and everything, and it ends friendly. It's not a, you know, it's not a bash fest where, you know, everybody gets ticked off and they start calling each other names. It's an actual intellectual conversation with some humor.
Yeah, and the key word there is intellectual. You know, that they allow people to have opinions and walk away with their opinions. You know, it's just yeah, that's a sane way to do it.
Yeah. So I mean, he's been doing it, I don't know how many years, but he's been doing it for I think at least 20. I don't know.
At least,
you know.
and yeah, and he, you know, he's one of the few, I think, and a lot of people don't like him for that very reason, that he's so outspoken like that. And in some cases, people look at it as being abrasive, but, you know, it's just his point of view that usually is grounded in facts and, you know, information that presents a point of view, you know, smartly, you know, intelligently. So
at least he can defend his point of view. You know, too many people, you know, read something and say, okay, you know, this is what I believe. And then they don't have a leg to stand on once you actually start talking through those details, because they have no other information than, I read this reporter, this column, and this is what he said. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
Whereas Bill Maher kind of digs into things. And like I said, you know, I mean, his base is he's a comedian,
yes,
you know, and he's also very smart. And I like the way he does things, but, you know.
Yeah. I think,
welcome to the Bill Maher fan club.
Yeah, exactly. But without, you know, belaboring the thing, it's just because I know a lot of people like this, including people in my own family, and they can start out, you know, a rationale for something with the word because, and then fill in the blanks later from where they got their information from. And if it's grounded in multiple sources and things like that, then great, you know. But you know, if not, then you just have to accept their ideas, at least as their ideas, not that you have to agree with it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about Sign.
Okay.
That's the trailer that I'd watched before you came on, And like I said, if anybody goes to Lou's website, you can see these trailers. They're pretty spectacular, and we'll get into why they're better than most in a few minutes. But let's talk about Sign. That came out in 2014.
Right.
And what's that book about?
You know, that was a real labor of work in the truest sense, that it was my first novel, and I worked so hard on it, and I went through a number of edits with some editors that I respected. And you know, there was one point after a couple of years working on the novel where I had to start over again. And because there were so many flaws in the story that I didn't see, because as you know, as a writer yourself, you're working within your own environment, and the advantage of that is you don't need anyone around you, and you can do your research the way you do your research.
Right.
And then, you know, you put together what you think is the best effort of that. And so after what I would call them false starts, I finally got to the point where I hit my groove with that novel, and what the story was about. And I was able to finally get it down in a way that I thought was compelling, interesting. It hit multiple genres in that sense. And I felt it was a good story. And at one point, the publisher contacted me, and they said, you know, they didn't tell me who, and this was from England. They said somebody's interested in looking at this for a potential movie, you know. So it didn't go anywhere, but it told me that I must have done something right with the story to entice someone to even consider it.
Sure.
So the story is basically in its basic simplistic core, and I don't want to like be so trite about it, but on the topmost, you know, flow chart, org chart, there is good versus evil. That is the core thing. And then there are two main protagonists in the story who have to deal with this, and they happen to be husband and wife. And throughout the book, the wife is missing some of the details of why bad things are happening to them. And it's because the husband did something a year before that caused their entire lives to spin downward. But she didn't know it. He was suspecting what it was, but he didn't know it either. And finally, you know, when we get to sort of the second act of the book, where, you know, things are coming to a head before the resolution, we find out what all that stuff's about. And he has to come clean with his wife, tell her what happened, and why this might be affecting their lives together insofar as they both could die by his actions. I mean, that's a real, you know, brief summary of the core idea of the story.
Sure. Okay. And so let's talk about the book trailer, I guess. So you have a history of working in the film and video industry, I guess, or you taught it in school, or you're telling
I did both.
Yeah.
I worked in the industry, and I worked in television and film, and then I taught that at SUNY Buffalo, or SUNY Buffalo State, I should say,
Sure.
in the television and film arts program.
Okay.
And my focus was, I worked with a screenwriter who taught most of the screenwriting courses, and I taught all the production courses. So I would take my students and work them through the process of what it's like to put a film together, how to deal with a script, how to deal with actors, locations, work with, you know, the proper etiquette of doing a film shoot somewhere, and working with a film commission. In this case, it was in Buffalo, New York. So how to deal with the Buffalo and Niagara Film Commission. And they were great helping us do it legally. You know, if police had to block a street off, they would do that. And so we did it from a student perspective. We tried to teach them all the right steps in the professional aspects of the business of making film and video and for television, and the creative aspects of that.
Sure.
Because the creative aspects are one component of a much bigger picture. Yeah. So yeah, and so because of that, and because of my background in that, you know, I decided that, you know, once, you know, I sort of exhausted what the book company was willing to put forward, you know, the publishing company, which was very little, but I have no bad words to say about them. They just were so small, they didn't have the resources to say, hey, go out and do what you want to do. So I would raise money on my own to do what we needed to do and to produce this book trailer for Sign. And for what production costs for short films, particularly because I worked on a number of those, we did it very, very cheaply because I knew a lot of people, and a lot of people donated their time and effort for it. It didn't cost nothing. I mean, there were probably $8,000 worth of expenses, but at the end of the day, the product was really high quality. Yeah.
I think for most, there's a happy medium. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff with just some video software. I mean, you
Absolutely.
really can. The one thing that I see a lot of authors doing with their book trailers is it becomes, you know, kind of a mini book blurb, kind of. And it's kind of text with some motion in the back and a little bit of music or a reading, you know, somebody doing a voiceover or something like that. If they're fancy. If they're not fancy, they're just you know, the book title with some, you know, wavy weird stuff in the back and buy today at Amazon, and that's it. And those you can do on BookBrush and, you know, stuff like that, or Canva or whatever. And I think there's a happy medium between, you know, I mean, you can tell when people put a lot of work into it, or put some work into it, and you can tell when somebody does it in 10 minutes.
Sure. When I started to do the work for Awake, the short stories, I did it all myself with Adobe After Effects, Adobe Premiere Editor, and Photoshop, and some stock footage that I had shot over the last couple of years that never got used for anything, that I could sort of tweak and push and pull to make it work for what I needed it to work for. And it cost nothing except my time. The biggest takeaway I got from any of these things, whether it's for Sign or Awake, is the analytics I got back from Facebook and /Instagram on, you know, how people watch these things and the demographics that you're trying to approach and trying to break out, and how long. And I was stunned to find, you know, that the 80% of your viewers, no matter what this stuff is, will go away after the first 5 to 8 seconds. So based on all the analytic data that I got back from them, I took a look at the marketing ideas, and I thought, well, I need to put out material, promotional video material that is 15 seconds or less. And for Facebook /Instagram, 40% of the viewers, if you have motion in your video, over and above a still, I'm trying to say, if you have motion in there, you increase your audience by 40% just by doing that. So I learned a lot from some trial runs of trying to do some promotional material on those platforms. So I included Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and that was pretty much it. But, you know, then trying to tag sales to that, like, can you actually correlate a jump in sales to any one thing that you did at any given time? And I'll just end this part of my explanation by saying the best thing that came out of that was I picked up about 7 or 8 reviewers that wanted to. I sent them a copy of the book. They reviewed the book. I think one or two didn't do anything. They just never read it. And, but 6 or whatever gave it a good review, wrote it up on different platforms. I checked out their viewership and their people that follow them, and they're in the neighborhood of anywhere from 15 to 19,000 people. So while it's not astronomical, it's an audience that I would never be able to tap into.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the difficult things as a small author, trying to break in and trying to find those, as they call them, influencers like yourself, you know?
Yeah. You know, the thing that I think is interesting is, you know, there's all those people out there that say, you know, hey, I'm going to throw this in my newsletter for, you know, $25 or whatever it is. And it's going to hit, you know, 140,000 people. And you can do something like that every day for a month and not see a spike.
Absolutely.
You can go and have a book reviewer, you know, have somebody that reviews books and they have, you know, 7,000-8,000 followers that are rapidly following them. And you can get a couple hundred people, you know, pretty quick.
Yes.
You know, if they like your book, you know, and
yes.
I think it's much better to do it in small little chunks like that versus the, you know, you're going to hit 1 million people. No, you're not.
Exactly. Exactly. When I did sign, I did a promotional giveaway on Goodreads, you know, and I sent out, I think it was 10 books maybe. And I had one winner in England and the rest scattered over the United States, maybe one in Canada. And I got a terrific review from the woman who read it in England. I was able to get someone who runs a sort of supernatural horror bent book club. And they said, would you work with us for our next book, which is going to come up in a couple of months, and the people will buy that book who are participating in that. And this book club, I don't know how many thousands of people were in it. Not everybody participates. You know, at the time I did it, I think only less than 50 people participated in my particular time with them. But somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 people got the book. I would communicate back and forth with them on a question and answer basis periodically through the month that they were doing this book. So it was an audience and a time and a exposure that I just had no idea about. It just popped up from something else that I did. And to go sort of back into what you just said a minute ago, you're not going to hit 1 million people. You know, it was, in that case, it was 50 or less, but those were 50 people that were into the idea of the story, you know? So
right.
It's Jeff, it's truly a hard slog to get new readers, keep people engaged, find the value in what you do. And will they take the time, you know, because it is their time to read your book. Yeah. Will they read the book? And that you're asking someone a lot to do that. You're saying, take a block of your time and read these 70,000 words. That's a big commitment.
And if they do and they love it, you've got a fan for life. If they, you know, don't really get into it, then, you know, they feel like they waste their time and they won't read anything else that you've written.
That,
you know, which
exactly. Yeah.
You know, kind of the, you know, the game with the editing and everything else. But
yeah,
you know, the main thing is to get a group of people, you know, small hordes of people that that will come read your book at certain times. You know, I mean, just, you know, spurts of people, and then build a base from there. And it's just it is a game of inches.
Absolutely. And that's why that I felt it was important to not wait until I finished the novel I've been working on, and I'm still only halfway through the thing. There's roadblocks like everybody has for various reasons, and I felt it was important to get more material out there. And so that's why Awake was a good timed piece for me in that regard. It's had good reviews thus far, and I feel that the stories are solid, short little snippets of work that I think go a long way for me trying to keep whatever momentum, if you want to call it that, even though it's glacial, you know, to keep things moving along as a writer.
Very good. So you write horror basically. What's your inspiration for that? How'd you get started?
Actually, this is going to sound a little crazy, and it doesn't go to the genre, but I'm a musician as well. And decades ago, I used to write music with another guy, and we would record that music. We had an album out with Infinity MCA back in those days, and so we wrote music and we wrote lyrics, and within those lyrics are, you know, stories. They're small little snippets of events in people's lives, and some can be sort of event based, and others can be a little deeper than that if you want it like that. So I actually have been writing on some fashion for a long time. And then I sort of did in my mind, the natural evolution of, well, I'll write some short stories and see how that goes. In fact, There Are No Doors on a Cocoon, I put out in 2007, and that's just filled with flash fiction. And I won a couple of awards for my flash fiction back then. And I thought, well, these stories are interesting because, you know, everybody has a different definition of how long flash is. But, you know, my stories were basically anywhere from 600 or 700 words to maybe 1,500 at the most, at the very most. So I came up with a bunch of flash fiction, compiled it as a collection, and put that out back in 2007. And so that's sort of how I sort of locked into the idea of storytelling formally. And then I realized I had more to say in terms of how to bring a story forward, build up the tension a little bit. And even though I write horror as sort of like the mothership of the genre, I write crime, supernatural crime, and, you know, what people might call, yes, thrillers. Yep. Exactly. And there are a few of my stories that really don't have a horror aspect to it in the truest sense. There was a crime that happened here back when I was young, you know, like in my early teens, but it was sensational. There was some woman, you know, kidnapping children from their front yards and then, you know, absconding with the children till she finally ramped it up to the point where she killed one. And they caught her, and, you know, everything played out the way it did in the courts, but it had everybody absolutely horrified. So I wrote a story called The Mommy Woman, and it's about this woman, or a woman like her, because I changed names and things like that. But there's horror within that, you know, even though everybody has a different interpretation of what horror is. Horror is something that makes people bite their hand and say, Jesus. I mean,
I think child abductions probably fits right in there.
Oh, absolutely. And I wrote it for the most part from the perspective of one of the kids who was about 6 or 7 years old, who was kidnapped, and he got away. But I wrote it like, what was he seeing? What was he thinking? And, you know, how would a little boy, you know, think of this terror that he's going through? And, you know, his mind wasn't planning in the long term. It was just, everything was immediate. You know, how do I get myself away from this woman, because she's dominant to me in every way you can imagine, not just in size, but in intellectual ability to be able to outguess what I might try and do, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so I'm sorry if I got off track a little bit here,
No,
but
it's
yeah. So I think I approach stories that, you know, could happen to people, I think. And you know, some horror is you know, fantastical, so you'd have to buy into certain things and create certain worlds to make things happen. um I approach things more from, like, if it would happen to me, you know, that kind of thing. I
hmm.
guess I'm losing the thread on that a little bit, but uh, Jeff, some of the things that I do with writing have been going on for years. And what I do is, after the semester's out for the year, I would pack my car up with my computer, a printer, a bunch of reference books, and some novels I would read or was going to read, and some typed out versions of my work. And I'd hit the road with no place in mind particularly, just to make sure I got out of town, just so that I had no interruptions. And I would purposely drive away from huge population centers. I would go to small town USA, and I'd find someplace, you know, a couple hundred miles from here, and I'd check into some no-tell motel, and I would divide my time up between, you know, exploring the town. I used to love going to diners and just sitting there drinking coffee, watching everybody with a notebook, a novel, and, you know, take notes of watching everything that went on in this little town.
Sure.
And or ride the bus, you know, hop on the bus and go into an urban area and just hang out and see what goes on there. I did the same thing in New York City. So I considered it non-focused research, where I would go in and do experiential type things to see how that might affect what I might write at some point, or then go back to these notes. Is this one person a good model for a character that I'm writing? And I did pull characters that way. So another kind of thing that I do that helps my writing is I have to actually go out and do something. Like if I'm writing in Sign, the couple is stranded in the middle of nowhere on a country road, and they see someone standing 50 yards away from them at 2 o'clock in the morning, and all they see is a shadow. And they don't have their car, they have each other. But I tried to put myself in that mindset, like, you're stranded, you're trying to get somewhere, it's a full moon, how much can you see? And then all of a sudden, that person appears in front of you. And what does that do to the way you think? What does that do to, you know, your ability to feel secure and safe within yourself, and in this case, the husband and wife? So I would do that. I would go out to the country, I would lock my car, it would be a full moon, I'd walk away from my car a quarter mile, and I'd stand there and I'd look around, and I'd say, okay, what can I see? If somebody shows up on the road in front of me, why are they there? And if they are there, what am I thinking about that? So, you know, where I can, obviously I can't experience everything. But when I can, I try and do that. I try and get a sense for the reality of somebody's feelings in a given situation. And it does have its limitations. I understand that. But it does provide me sort of like a key to the way it really might be, because I think of myself as a visual writer, as opposed to you know, I don't know if there is a classical writer. I think all writers use influences and experiences that they've come across themselves in their own lives to bring into their writing in some fashion. So that little Trek for me used to help a lot in the early development of how I would write things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That's very, Neil Gaiman talks about doing that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Quite a bit, go sit in a cemetery for a while, go, travel to whatever,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Stephen King even talks about that a little bit in his, in one of his books about writing, I think, or whatever.
Yeah, his book on writing. That's a great book. It's grounded in sort of the technical side of things, and then in fact I use a quote from Stephen King in the opening of Awake, which to paraphrase it, basically says, to make things believable, you have to be able to believe in the idea that a serial killer will help an old lady across the street. That people, even though they're terrible people, they will still do things that are normal because they're humans.
You know what I think would be fun would be writing a story about a serial killer and making the serial killer Stephen King.
Boy, that would blow people's minds.
It would, but I'd probably also get sued over it, but that's okay.
Yeah, but in the sense of what you're saying, though, is like, come 20 years from now, after he's gone, or that we find out that he actually was that guy. I mean,
yeah,
people would go, whoa, it's just, yow.
15 bodies found in the basement. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. That's why it was so good.
Yeah. We see where he got this. Somebody cobbled. That would be really funny.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. So just out of curiosity, so just kind of going back to your film and video, you said that you worked in television. Anything notable that
I worked for ABC, and I worked as an art director or design director, depending on the year. So I mostly was associated with the news division, and
okay.
If somebody blew up a building, the graphics team would jump to producing all the graphics for everything that needed to be done,
Sure.
which included animations for the opening of a new show, promotional material that the promotional department would need to promote different things the station was doing, that kind of thing. Okay. So I had a background in film and television before I actually worked in television, and particularly computer graphics. Like back in the mid 80s, doing computer graphics was not like, I hate to sound like one of those guys, well, in my day, but it really was crazy. Like, you had to deal with RGB lookup tables to deal with color and things like that. And you were doing, you were using Unix as a base, computer language for the stuff that you had to interact with. So by knowing and learning computer graphics through the medical and commercial industry, I was able to parlay that into, well, I walk into a television station and say, well, I can do this because I saw that you have a job opening for an art director. So
sure.
Show them the portfolio, show them my technical ability in that particular area. And so I was able to get in that way. And then, of course, tagged into that, other than graphics and animation, is shooting commercials. We had to do a lot of commercial shoots and things like that. And that in turn, because at least at that time, a lot of TV stations didn't have a real robust in-house production department. So they would turn to, for the bigger projects, they would turn to a production facility outside, and they would hire them to do the film shoots and things like that. So it helped me learn, that sort of missing piece that I had from that.
I think it's interesting the way things have progressed. You talk about the 80s all the way to now. I mean,
oh God, yeah.
It's quite a jump.
Yeah, if anyone is working in television right now, and if you're sort of like contemporary, someone who grew up, born in 1999, and they grew up as a digital native, they know that when they walk into a television situation, that the director running the switcher for the 5 o'clock news is doing everything. There's no longer an audio person. There's no longer a Chiron person for the supers that come up. Everything has been no cameramen. It's robotic cameras inside the studios. So even street reporters write their own stuff, shoot their own stuff, edit their own stuff, do the voiceovers, do most of everything, unless you're working for one of the major networks who've got the money still to have an independent producer, work with a reporter, and work with a field cameraman that can work and do that whole thing. So, but now you're right. I mean, everybody'd be blown away by what isn't available, as a career. It's a real big question to ask. Like if you're sending someone to college to further their career in a digital workspace, and I'm talking about media, where is that industry going for that person, and where will their job prospects be in the long run? So you've got to have a lot more depth than just your ability to point and shoot a camera, because that idea within itself may be gone.
Well, I think it's funny, like in the 90s, a graphics designer, with the web, the internet coming out and everything else, is like, oh, this is a long-term job. This is a high paying, blah, 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 blah. And fast forward a decade, maybe 15 years, and they're a dime a dozen.
Yes, they are. And Jeff, the equipment itself, like people on their laptop can do just about everything, with different photo editors and audio editors. I mean, if you don't progress, and I'm talking about the person you just mentioned that thought they'd have a long-term job forever because of what they know at the time. And if you didn't stay up with everything as it's changing by the year, one after the other, you were out. You were out of a job. I saw it happen to a lot of people. Yeah. So it's a brutal thing to do. In fact, it was a struggle as a teacher, a professor at SUNY Buffalo, to stay up with what I was teaching. I didn't want to be anachronistic in the way I was approaching the material. And if you didn't, stay up with what they knew already, and I always looked at it this way: it's 100-page book. They're on page 6 and I'm on page 7. So as long as I could stay ahead of it just a little bit, then I'd be relevant in the sense of how I would teach things. Yeah. I won't even get into the whole, archaic nature of tenure, because there are people that get tenure and they sit back and they never move a muscle again. And, these students are paying a lot of money to go to college and further their careers or start their careers. And they end up with some dinosaur that doesn't want to go forward and move with what's happening out there. Yeah, it's a strange time. And I think, we're living through it. I've seen it. And I guess we won't know how the story plays out in our lifetime, I guess, because, everything changes. So I think Moore's law, isn't it, doubles everything? Computers double every 18 months or something like that.
It isn't storage, I think, and storage and memory doubles. Then with that, there's a snowball effect in technology.
And it becomes, what is it, the exponential at that point,
Right. The old joke is there's Moore's law and there's also Microsoft's law. Microsoft will be 18 months ahead of needing storage and RAM than it's actually produced. So
true.
You have 4 gigs of RAM and that's the brand new thing. Well, Microsoft still needs 8.
Yes, exactly.
As soon as you can get 64, they need 128.
Yeah. It's funny. Today, I when I was preparing the materials that I wanted to give you today, you know, I had, for memory reasons, I had dumped PowerPoint for Microsoft because I needed the memory a long time ago, and I had dumped Mac's Keynote, or I think it's called.
Sure.
And so I said, I'll just download those again so I can put this together for Jeff. And much to my chagrin, you know, Mac says, hey, you got to get the new upgrade on your OS.
Oh, yeah.
And tie up your computer for the next 8 hours or whatever it was. And then Microsoft had a similar thing. So I said, screw that. I got online and went to Google Drive. Google has a product, free, works on everything, and does exactly what those two other things did. So it's just, I guess Google's got their flaws, but they make products that people can use for free that talk to each other. That's the best part of it. It's cross-platform, and you can use it for whatever you need. So there is a way around some of this stuff.
There is. I think Google stuff is a bit clunky yet, but you know.
Oh yeah, it is.
It is what it is.
It is, but it's free, you know. And,
it is.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, we're kind of running to the end of the program here. Do you have anything you want to add to tell your readers and fans?
That, you know, I'm pretty proud of Awake, Tales of Terror. I think it's a good collection of short stories that, you know, what the classic thing is, you know, it's a page turner, but they kind of move along. And I spent, you know, a good deal of time with an editor working on these. It's promoted through the Horror Writers Association, great organization. I probably should have talked about that a little bit more, but I hope people take a chance and, you know, check it out online. You can read the first few pages at any of those websites that sell the book. It is available everywhere. It's not an Amazon thing only. It's published through wherever you want to buy books from. That's where it's available, including Canada, the UK, and Australia.
Cool.
So yeah, so please give it a shot. Check it out.
Sounds good. Sounds good. With that, I'm going to say that, you know, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you doing this.
And it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
And with that, I'm going to say, everybody, I hope that you're having a great day, and please keep your chin up, because everything's going to be getting better. It's getting better every day around here. So with that, good day.
Please hit the subscribe button. I get a bonus for every subscriber, and I only need 1,506 more to become a full-time paid employee. Help me, please.